They thought they destroyed me the night before my wedding. What they actually did was set me free to find something much better. At 32, I thought I understood betrayal. What I discovered the night before my wedding taught me that some lessons can only be learned when your entire world crumbles in a single moment. But here's what they don't tell you about rock bottom. It's the perfect foundation for building something unshakable. My best friend since college, Marcus, had insisted on handling the hotel arrangements for the wedding party. "You've got enough on your plate, man. Let me take care of this," he said, showing me screenshots of the bookings on his phone. Always the helpful one, always there when I needed him. Or so I believed. I should have known something was off. The signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs through the weeks leading up to what should have been the happiest day of my life. But when you're drowning in wedding preparations, work deadlines, and the beautiful chaos of planning a future with someone you love, you tend to miss the shadows creeping in from the edges. It all started to unravel at the rehearsal dinner after party. The restaurant was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the warm glow of celebration. My fiancée, Jessica, had been radiant all evening, her emerald dress catching the candlelight as she moved from table to table, charming our families and friends. But as the night wore on, I noticed her growing quieter, more distant. "I'm feeling overwhelmed," she texted me around 10:30. "Need some air. Going to head back to the room early." Pre-wedding jitters, I told myself, completely normal. 3 years together, and I knew Jessica well enough to recognize when she needed space to process her emotions. I kissed her forehead gently and told her I'd see her in the morning. "Get some rest, beautiful. Tomorrow's our day." But as I tried calling her an hour later to check in, the call went straight to voicemail. That's when I noticed Marcus was missing too. "Probably went to grab more ice," someone suggested when I asked around. But his silver Honda wasn't in the parking lot. A cold knot formed in my stomach, the kind that comes when your subconscious recognizes a truth your heart isn't ready to accept. That's when I remembered something that would change everything. Earlier that week, Jessica had been acting strange about her phone. Protective. Secretive. She'd changed her passcode after 3 years of using her sister's birthday, May 15th. But old habits die hard, and muscle memory is a powerful thing. I'd caught her entering it twice, and both times, she'd used the same sequence, 0847. I took the elevator up to the 4th floor, my footsteps echoing in the carpeted hallway. The ice machine hummed in the distance, a lonely sound that seemed to mock the celebration happening floors below. I used the spare key card Marcus had given me earlier, in case of emergency, he'd said with that easy smile of his. Room 847. The door beeped green, and I stepped inside. They didn't even hear me come in at first. The television was on, casting flickering shadows across the rumpled bed where my future wife lay tangled in sheets with the man who was supposed to stand beside me at the altar. I didn't yell, didn't throw anything, didn't make a scene. Instead, I stood there in the doorway, phone out, taking pictures. Evidence. Because even in that moment of shattering betrayal, some part of my mind was already 3 steps ahead, already calculating, already planning. That's when Marcus noticed me. He didn't jump up or scramble to cover himself. Instead, he smirked, actually smirked, and reached for his phone with the casual confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. "She was never really yours to begin with," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Want to see the messages? How long this has been going on? How she comes to me every time you're too busy with work to pay attention to what really matters." Jessica was crying now, clutching the hotel sheets to her chest, her mascara creating dark rivers down her cheeks. "Daniel, please, I can explain." "Save it," I said, my voice steady as granite. "Keep the ring, by the way. It's fake anyway." It wasn't, but watching her face crumble was worth the lie. The ring had cost me 4 months of overtime, countless lunch breaks spent researching the perfect cut, the right setting. But in that moment, making her believe it was worthless felt like the only power I had left. Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass, always so controlled, so measured. This is exactly why she needed more, someone who could actually make her feel alive, someone who understood passion. I cut him off before he could finish his speech. "You know what's funny, Marcus? You just lost your job and don't even know it yet." His smile flickered like a candle in the wind. "We worked at the same engineering firm, different departments, but the same company handbook. The same HR policies, the same zero-tolerance approach to workplace harassment and misconduct. "You're bluffing," he said, but I could see the uncertainty creeping into his eyes like fog rolling in from the ocean. I smiled then, not the warm smile of friendship we'd shared for over a decade, but the cold, calculating smile of someone who'd just realized exactly how deep his opponent's grave was going to be. "Remember that Mitchell Creek project you led last quarter? The one that got you that $7,000 bonus and a letter of commendation?" I paused, letting the words sink in. Sarah kept receipts. All of them. She was just waiting for the right moment. Sarah was his direct report, a brilliant engineer who'd recently transferred to my department after months of what she described as creative differences with Marcus's management style. What she'd really been documenting was a systematic pattern of idea theft, credit manipulation, and workplace intimidation that would make any HR department's blood run cold. The color drained from Marcus's face like water from a broken dam. Sarah wouldn't. "Oh, but she did," I continued, holding up my phone. "And I just sent some very interesting screenshots to Patricia. You remember Patricia, right? Your fiancée? The one you're supposed to marry next month?" Now Jessica was staring at him, her tears momentarily forgotten. "You're engaged?" The room fell silent except for the distant hum of the air conditioning and the sound of Marcus's carefully constructed world beginning its spectacular collapse. I left them there, arguing in hushed, desperate whispers, and walked out as calmly as I'd entered. In the elevator, I called my parents. "Wedding's off. I'll explain everything later, but trust me on this one." My mother's voice broke a little when she asked if I was okay, but I assured her I would be. Because for the first time in hours, I actually believed it. I drove to Murphy's Diner, the 24-hour place where I'd spent countless late nights studying during college. The waitress, a kind woman named Dolores who'd been working there since before I was born, brought me coffee without being asked and didn't comment on my formal attire or the shell-shocked expression I probably wore. I opened my laptop and started writing emails. HR would have a very interesting Monday morning. The wedding venue deposit was non-refundable $8,000 down the drain. But sitting there in that familiar booth, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I realized it was the best money I'd ever spent. Consider it the price of discovering who people really were before I legally bound myself to one of them and emotionally bound myself to the other. Marcus thought this was over, that I'd break down, make a scene, beg for explanations or second chances. He didn't know me at all. I don't do drama. I do consequences. This isn't a story about heartbreak, though my heart certainly broke that night. This is a story about justice, the kind that comes not from emotion, but from patience, planning, and the beautiful certainty that actions always have consequences. 5 days have passed since that night, and I've been busy. Very busy. Monday morning found me in the office at 6 a.m., a full hour before my scheduled meeting with HR. I brought documentation and months of it. Every inappropriate email Marcus had sent from his work account, every time he'd taken credit for someone else's innovations, every favor he'd leveraged into personal gain. Sarah hadn't just been keeping receipts. She'd been building a case that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. But let me back up and tell you about the aftermath of that night, because the real story isn't just about betrayal, it's about how quickly a house of cards can fall when you remove the right support beam. The morning after what I'd started calling the incident, I spent 4 hours on the phone with wedding vendors. Here's a pro tip. When vendors hear that the bride was caught with the best man, they become surprisingly flexible about their refund policies. The photographer returned 60% of our deposit. The florist, a romantic at heart, refunded everything except the cost of the roses she'd already ordered. Even the caterer, initially rigid about their no-refund policy, softened when I explained the situation. The ones who didn't offer refunds? Well, let's just say that Yelp reviews from disappointed wedding guests who'd witnessed the vendor's inflexibility firsthand can be remarkably detailed and persuasive. Jessica had been blowing up my phone since dawn, first with apologies that dissolved into accusations. "You never had time for me. You were always working." Then back to apologies again when she realized her position was untenable. I hadn't blocked her number. Instead, I let the messages accumulate like evidence in a trial I hadn't yet decided to prosecute. The truly beautiful part was that she'd been using her work email for some of these messages. The same work email that belonged to the architectural firm where she was a junior designer. The same firm that had explicit policies about personal use of company communication systems. The same firm where she'd been coordinating her meetings with Marcus for months, leaving a digital trail that even a first-year law student could follow. Marcus, meanwhile, had gone surprisingly quiet, probably because Patricia, his fiancée, wasn't taking his calls. It turns out she'd been having suspicions for months, and my evidence was simply the final piece of a puzzle she'd been trying to solve. We met for coffee on Tuesday morning, Patricia and I, at a small cafe downtown that overlooked the river. She was a marketing executive, sharp-eyed and articulate, with the kind of professional composure that comes from years of dealing with corporate politics and client deceptions. He always had excuses for working late, she told me, stirring cream into her coffee with the mechanical precision of someone trying to maintain control. Always with project deadlines, always with team emergencies that couldn't wait until morning. Funny how many of those emergencies involved taking credit for other people's work. That's when she showed me her phone, screenshots of conversations between Marcus and not just Jessica, but 3 other women. All from the past 18 months. All while he was engaged to Patricia. All following the same pattern: the late-night texts, the borrowed hotel rooms, the elaborate lies about work commitments and professional conferences. You know what's truly pathetic? Patricia added, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent too many nights lying awake, wondering if she was losing her mind. He made me feel crazy for being suspicious. Called me paranoid last month when I asked about his relationship with Jessica. Said I was letting my imagination run wild, that maybe I should consider therapy for my trust issues. I hadn't planned on involving Patricia in what came next, but she volunteered before I could even ask. I want to help, she said, leaning across the small table. He needs to understand that actions have consequences. The HR meeting had gone exactly as I'd anticipated. They'd launched a formal investigation within 24 hours, and Marcus was called in Tuesday afternoon for what his calendar probably listed as a routine performance review. He'd tried playing it cool at first, that same smirk he'd worn in the hotel room, right up until they started presenting the evidence. 17 instances of intellectual property theft, 12 documented cases of inappropriate workplace relationships that violated company policy, 8 formal complaints from former team members that had been buried in his personnel file. The smile disappeared from his face like smoke in a hurricane. But here's the real masterpiece. While all this was happening, Jessica still didn't know about Patricia or the other women. She thought she was special, that Marcus would leave his complicated situation and build a life with her. The group chat Patricia and I had started with Sarah from my office had become a fascinating study in how deception unravels when all the threads are pulled simultaneously. You want to know the most beautiful part of all this? Patricia had said during one of our strategy sessions. I'm not even angry anymore. I'm grateful that I found out who he really was before I married him, before I had children with him, before I wasted any more years of my life on someone who saw other people as nothing more than opportunities to exploit. Marcus's last week at the company was a thing of beauty. He'd been scheduled to present his innovative new client management system at the quarterly department meeting, a system that, as it turned out, was largely borrowed from a competitor's public GitHub repository. When the IT department ran their routine code comparison algorithms, the similarities were impossible to ignore. He never made it to that presentation. At 3:15 on Thursday afternoon, Marcus was escorted from the building by security, carrying a cardboard box containing his desk plants, protein powder, and a coffee mug that read "World's Best Project Manager." The irony was not lost on those of us who'd been documenting his actual project management skills. But the real crescendo came that evening, when Patricia walked into the lobby of our office building. She'd driven 2 hours from her marketing firm in the city, not to cause a scene, but to deliver some information that she thought HR might find interesting. You see, Patricia had access to client communication systems at her company, systems that included email archives going back 2 years. Systems that contained correspondence with Marcus from 6 months earlier, when he'd tried to hit on her colleague Rebecca, while claiming he was single and looking for someone who could appreciate a man with ambition. Rebecca had rejected him, naturally, and somehow found herself mysteriously removed from key projects when Marcus later restructured his team assignments. Funny how that worked. Patricia didn't just bring screenshots. She brought Rebecca herself, along with two other former team members who'd quit Marcus's department over what they diplomatically described as management-style differences. They'd been waiting for an opportunity to speak up, waiting for someone to create a safe space where their voices would be heard and believed. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Marcus was terminated before dinner time. Jessica, meanwhile, had chosen that particular Tuesday to try winning me back. She appeared at my apartment around 7 p.m., tears streaming down her face, carrying a bottle of the wine we'd shared on our first anniversary and a letter she'd written explaining how Marcus had manipulated her, how she'd made a terrible mistake, how she wanted to rebuild what we'd had. It might have been more convincing if she hadn't sent Marcus a WhatsApp message just 2 hours earlier asking when they could meet up to discuss their future together. I still had access to her backup email account, where all notifications went, a digital breadcrumb trail she'd forgotten existed. I let her talk for exactly 5 minutes, timing it on my watch. Then I played the audio recording from my security doorbell, the one from the previous week, where she'd been giggling with Marcus about how they'd finally be able to be together openly once he landed his promotion. "He's getting fired, Jessica, right now. Check your phone." She fumbled for her phone with trembling hands, and I watched her face change as she scrolled through Twitter. Someone, Patricia, actually had just posted a lengthy thread about workplace harassment and toxic leadership, naming names. It was going viral in our industry circles, shared by women who'd had their own experiences with men like Marcus, amplified by colleagues who'd witnessed his behavior firsthand. Jessica started frantically texting Marcus. No response. She called him. Straight to voicemail. That's when her own phone buzzed with an email from her company's HR department, scheduling a meeting for the following morning to discuss inappropriate use of company communication systems and potential policy violations. "What did you do?" she whispered, looking at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time in months. "Nothing," I replied, and it was the truth. "You did this to yourselves. Every email, every secret meeting, every lie you thought was clever, it's all documented. Maybe next time, consider using personal accounts for planning betrayals instead of corporate email systems that are monitored and archived." She left looking like she'd witnessed her own funeral. An hour later, her Instagram story featured her drinking wine and posting vague quotes about toxic men and emotional manipulation. The comments were illuminating. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd noticed changes in her behavior over the past few months. Marcus wasn't faring much better. His LinkedIn profile now listed him as seeking new opportunities, though given the industry gossip network and Patricia's very public thread about his professional conduct, those opportunities were becoming increasingly scarce. His engagement was officially over. Patricia had made sure everyone understood exactly why. The apartment they'd shared. Marcus had 30 days to find a new place because Patricia had co-signed the lease and wanted him gone. The friend group that had once revolved around his charismatic personality. They'd started sharing their own stories about loans he'd never repaid, girlfriends he'd hit on, credit he'd stolen for group projects going back to college. The pattern had always been there. I just hadn't been looking for it. 3 weeks later, I was having dinner with someone new. Rebecca, not the Rebecca from Marcus's workplace drama, but a different Rebecca I'd met at a coffee shop while working on my laptop one Saturday morning. She was a teacher, genuine and kind, with laugh lines around her eyes and a way of listening that made you feel like your words actually mattered. "You seem remarkably well adjusted for someone who just went through what you went through," she'd said during our second date, when I'd finally told her the whole story. "I had good teachers," I'd replied. "Sometimes the best lessons come from the worst experiences." That's when Marcus appeared behind the counter at the burger place where Rebecca and I were having dinner. Life comes at you fast, as they say, and apparently it had come for Marcus with a vengeance. He was wearing a paper hat and a grease-stained uniform, trying to look invisible while taking orders from customers who might recognize him. He pretended not to see me at first, but Rebecca wanted to modify her order extra pickles, no onions, and walked up to the counter. She had no idea who he was, no context for the sudden tension that filled the air like smoke from a kitchen fire. The look on his face when I stepped up beside her was worth the price of admission to this cosmic comedy show. "Can I speak to you?" he muttered, glancing around to make sure his manager wasn't watching. "Just 5 minutes." I checked with Rebecca, who was completely fine with waiting, and followed him to the side of the building during his smoke break. That's when 6 months of carefully controlled rage finally erupted like a volcano that had been building pressure since the continental plates first shifted. He started yelling about how I'd ruined his life, how he was living in his mother's basement, how no one in our industry would hire him because of the lies I'd spread. Called me every name he could think of, his voice rising with each accusation until other customers were staring through the restaurant windows. I stood there and let him exhaust himself, watching a grown man throw a tantrum like a toddler who'd been told he couldn't have candy for dinner. "Feel better?" I asked when he finally ran out of steam. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed him Jessica's latest Instagram post, the one where she was back in her hometown, working at her father's hardware store, posting inspirational quotes about rebuilding your life from the ground up and finding yourself after toxic relationships. "Your soulmate's really living her best life, isn't she?" I said. "By the way, she told everyone you pressured her into it. That it was all your idea, that you convinced her to betray me because you'd promised her a future you couldn't deliver. Even told your mother that story when she called Jessica looking for answers about why her son was suddenly unemployed and single. Guess loyalty isn't her strongest character trait." He tried to grab my phone, a bad move, really bad move, but that's when fortune smiled on the situation. "Remember Patricia's new boyfriend Maurice, the security specialist she'd started dating? He happened to be having dinner inside with Patricia, celebrating some work milestone, and he'd noticed Marcus getting aggressive with someone in the parking lot. Maurice was 6'4" and had the kind of presence that suggested extensive experience with conflict resolution. One look was all it took for Marcus to remember that discretion is the better part of valor. But the real karma was happening inside the restaurant. While Marcus and I were having our parking lot conversation, Jessica had walked in. Apparently, she'd started coming to this particular chain specifically hoping to run into Marcus, not knowing he actually worked there now. She saw Rebecca sitting alone at our table and recognized her from my social media posts. According to Rebecca, Jessica had approached with all the confidence of someone who believed she held moral high ground. "You need to know what kind of man you're dating," Jessica had announced, sliding uninvited into the booth across from Rebecca. "He's manipulative, vindictive. He orchestrated everything that happened to destroy what Marcus and I had because he couldn't handle the fact that real love sometimes develops naturally between people." Rebecca, bless her heart, had simply started recording. Real love. Rebecca had replied with the kind of calm that comes from having taught middle school for 8 years. "You mean the kind where you sleep with your fiance's best friend the night before your wedding?" Jessica hadn't liked that response. She'd tried to snatch Rebecca's phone, claiming she was being harassed, which is when the restaurant manager got involved. Here's where the universe decided to add one final flourish to this symphony of consequences. The manager was Sarah's cousin, the same Sarah who'd been documenting Marcus's workplace misconduct. Small world, smaller town, and an even smaller community of people willing to tolerate manipulative behavior. By the time I came back inside, Jessica was being told she was no longer welcome at the establishment. Marcus was being informed that this would be his last week of employment, and Rebecca was calmly finishing her fries while reading the text messages Jessica had somehow thought would convince her that I was the villain in this story. "Your ex is certainly passionate about her perspective," Rebecca said, showing me her phone. "She tried to warn me about your manipulative tendencies." I showed her our vacation photos from last month. You know, the ones where we're hiking with the kids and they're teaching you how to identify different types of trees. She got pretty quiet after that. "Oh, did I mention that Rebecca has 2 children? 8 and 10 years old, bright and funny kids who love science experiments and building elaborate Lego cities and teaching adults about things like why leaves change colors and how caterpillars become butterflies. Real life, as it turns out, beats drama every single time." That night, I got a series of increasingly incoherent drunk texts from Jessica. Something about how she'd given up everything for Marcus and how I'd systematically destroyed their chance at happiness. Apparently, she'd expected him to bounce back quickly, to land another high-paying corporate job and sweep her away to the life he'd promised during those late-night hotel conversations. Finding out that he'd been working fast food for 3 months and hiding it from her was apparently the final straw that broke her carefully constructed fantasy. The next morning, Marcus's mother sent me a message. Unlike her son, she was actually a decent person who'd raised a child she thought she could be proud of before discovering otherwise. She apologized for everything, told me she was sorry about how things had unfolded, and mentioned that Marcus had been lying to everyone, claiming he was between consulting opportunities while secretly working at various service jobs. She'd found out the truth when a neighbor's teenager posted a TikTok video of Marcus in his burger uniform, captioned with something about, "When life comes for you fast." The video had somehow made its way to her Facebook feed, where it was shared by someone who recognized the name. The best part of this entire odyssey: my company promoted me to lead my own team. My first project? Cleaning up the mess Marcus had left behind, rebuilding the client relationships he damaged, and implementing new protocols to prevent future incidents of intellectual property theft. Sarah is now my senior team member, and together we've created what our department head called the most efficient and innovative workflow system the company has ever seen. Sometimes justice doesn't come from revenge. Sometimes it comes from simply letting people face the natural consequences of their choices while you focus on building something better. Rebecca and I have been together for 8 months now. I showed her all my previous posts about this situation on our third date, wanting complete transparency about what she was potentially getting involved with. Her response: "Good. You know how to stand up for yourself and the people you care about." My ex-husband didn't. We're planning a camping trip next month with her kids. They want to teach me how to fish and identify constellations. Real constellations, not the imaginary ones I thought I saw in relationships built on lies and convenience. Marcus and Jessica, last I heard, they were both back in their respective hometowns, working service jobs and trying to rebuild lives that had been constructed on foundations of deception and entitlement. Sometimes people get exactly what they've earned, no more and no less. The wedding deposits I lost, worth every penny for the education I received about human nature, loyalty, and the difference between love and manipulation. The friends I thought I'd lost when the truth came out. They weren't really friends to begin with. What I gained was infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that I could trust my instincts, that I could handle betrayal without becoming bitter, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well while other people face the consequences of their choices. At 33, I finally understand what my father meant when he told me that character is what you do when you think nobody's watching. It's also what you do when everybody is watching, and you have the power to destroy someone who's hurt you. I chose to let them destroy themselves. Sometimes that's the wisest choice of all.